to the extent that the modern UAP version of whatever is taking place is happening, those entities want to be seen, whether they're terrestrial or extraterrestrial. Whatever cloaking they have is obviously not working because we have a large number of highly credible reports. People have certainly seen something.
Yeah, there's a number of cases. The Battle of Los Angeles, they fired anti-gun turrets, anti-aircraft guns at this thing for hours. Obviously, there was something there. Some people suggest it was an early form of this projection technology, that they were using multiple spotlights as well. It was in the Hollywood Hills in California, so they had a lot of these spotlights that they'd shine in the sky back then, and so they had them all pointed up at this object, and they feel like that somehow that could have created a hologram effect. And that's indeed how I believe they created the Tupac hologram on the stage. They used like a smoke machine and 3 projectors to triangulate the imaging. And
so wait, sorry, I'm going to keep slowing you down because I really want to understand this. My impression in the modern version of the UAP question, the thing that stands out to me most is that you have what appear to be objects. They appear to be moving through the atmosphere at speeds that are improbable without an apparent means of propulsion, which could, of course, just mean they use some other kind of propulsion. But the thing that really doesn't sit well with me is that they don't appear to make a tremendous noise, that the displacement of air is, who knows, aliens could have technology that would cause the air displacement to be neutralized in some way that we can't understand. But if they're not bothering to cloak themselves visually, it's a little hard to understand why they would be doing that. And I'm even doubtful that it could be done that effectively.
Or whether it's being done by them at all, or whether these things are man-made altogether. And that's one thing that's missing from a lot of the mainstream conversation is the technology side of this. And the people that the mainstream, if you do get the technology side of this, you ask anyone at any UFO conference how UFOs fly, and your answer is going to be element 115. And it almost seems like they've poisoned the well on the scientific, physics side of this. Anyone in the physics community that wants to get into UFOs is sort of hit with this, oh God, this is just not something I even want to associate myself with scientifically or academically. Whereas if you really get into the science, like in those OSAP DIRD reports, that's the Defense Intelligence Reference Documents. You can search that on Black Vault and come up with some of those files. You get into the real cool stuff like metallic glasses, for example, which have elasticity and strength beyond carbon fiber, beyond steel and other things. And you talk about metamaterials, which are used in cloaking devices and invisibility shields, and also apparently in some of these warp drive skins, allegedly in the terahertz range. Interesting stuff you find, and then you get. I was looking into terahertz and what scientists were working on terahertz, and looked up classified terahertz and found, oh, here's a guy that was working at Wright State University right next to Wright-Patterson who brought a bunch of, work home with him and got a year in prison for it because it was classified, related to whatever he was doing that the U.S. Air Force was apparently, funding or interested in, because they're the ones who showed up and busted him. So you find interesting cases like that, which I don't think anyone was reporting on that story. It was out there in the news, and they had broken it. The first news report actually was from Fairborn, Ohio, and it was it said that they busted the guy for a marijuana grow. And then, like, the story changed. It wasn't really marijuana plants; it was classified documents, and that was just kind of to throw people off the trail. But the real story came out, and I picked it up, and I don't know if anyone else picked it up or really talked about it, but I thought that was an interesting connection because it kind of verified, well, at least they're doing classified research related to this. Maybe it was a setup or a plant, but that's, I don't know, to get a guy to do a year in jail, that's kind of hard for a psyop. So,
Well, I mean, yes and no. Look, it's not hard to come up with a proof of concept of how you might get somebody willing to spend a year in jail. Either they've got something on him and it was a better deal than he might have had, or, obviously most people will have their price. And anyway, it's not hard to imagine how it could be done. I'm not saying it is.
yeah.
being
Yeah,
done.
but I just go look down it's hard to look down the conspiracy rabbit hole sideways at some of this stuff. Because
Can I back you up a bit though? There's something that you breezed by there that I think is important for us to discuss, and you just feel free to correct me wherever I've got this wrong.
no,
Because
slow me
again,
down because I go off on this stuff. I've been doing it way too long.
yeah, you're in deep. With respect to things like propulsion technology, I should say, my brother Eric has obviously been active in this discussion, and one of the things that he points to is that the crossing of large distances, which is the number one obstacle, presumably, to any advanced civilization getting here, might actually not really be about propulsion at all. That it might be about space and time not functioning in the way that we have come to understand them, and that it might be possible to cross large distances without actually crossing them. And this is necessary. I'll just point out that our galaxy itself is 100,000 light years wide. Light, which we understand to be traveling at the fastest speed possible, takes 100,000 years to get just simply across the Milky Way, let alone to anywhere else. And, so that means that, light that we are seeing from the other side of the galaxy started its journey 90,000 years before humans started farming, right?
Okay. Now, how long did it take the light to get there from the photon's perspective?
Well, an interesting question. And believe me, we are almost immediately out of my depth mathematically and physically. To be honest,
well, he doesn't have a bad misconception of it. And the idea is that if you can focus a number of your photons on another point in space time, from the photon's perspective, is that those points are entangled. And the pilot wave interpretation, or the Bohmian interpretation of quantum mechanics, says that those waves travel forward and back in time, and then decide which way to go.
So we are out of my depth, but let's just say we can black box the question of how an alien intelligence might have found itself in proximity to Earth, and we can put aside skepticism with respect to whether or not they could be here at all, because there may or may not be mechanisms for crossing those large different distances on timescales that sound reasonable to us. And if they exist, then the things that are seen here on the Earth side of that journey are not likely, well, again, out of my depth, but are not likely to be whatever it is that crossed those large distances. They would be local transportation. Is that fair, or am I just...
Yeah, I think within an atmosphere, maybe the vast distances of space, if there's nothing in between, they might be able to do some type of a warp drive where you are able to entangle to another point in space time and then shrink the distance between using quantum entanglement. But for at least short distances, there's plenty of other technologies that, some of the stuff was discovered, Biffeld Brown effect, discovered in 1928 and was classified for 80 years. 2008, Obama declassified it along with a whole bunch of other stuff. And it very quietly, turns out the B-2 Spirit bomber uses a version of this where they positively charge the front leading edge of the wing and negatively charge the exhaust stream, and it helps with lift as well and propulsion, as well as the radar signature and visibility of the craft. And but this has been used for a number of years in programs, including, by Ames research facilities, in the 40s, when Brown was trying to sell this idea to the military, and they told him he was crazy, and that, his idea was there was nothing to it. But meanwhile, Ames went and stole the idea and was using it in the X-1 to positively charge that nose cone, that needle on the front end of the wingtips and the nose cone. And when they positively charged that, it created this like ion cloud, which would deflect the bow shock on the front end of the craft, so that when it went supersonic, it wouldn't rip apart. And it was a key component of how they broke the sound barrier. And it was Brown's technology. And then Brown came back again in the 50s, 1956, with Andrew Bonson in North Carolina with Bonson Labs. So you have Bonson bringing Brown in, and a number of other researchers came and visited, including Bryce and Cecil DeWitt from the nearby University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, the husband and wife team that your brother talks about on Joe Rogan and stuff. So there's a number of these cross pollinations. John Lear Sr. was there in one of the slides. That's John Lear's dad, who's the guy, the CIA pilot who broke the story at Area 51, and basically was he's like the grandfather of the Bob Lazar legend, in my opinion, which that's a whole nother rabbit hole.
Well, let's figure out how to address this. So
Sure.
far, I think what we've concluded is there are superficial limits to travel over long distances. There's lots of reason to wonder if there might not be mechanisms that would bypass those limits. So could there be an alien intelligence visiting our planet? There could be. We can't rule it out. If there is, it is presumably either never was and it's recently arrived, or is no longer interested in completely disguising its presence. So the question of the blind is lifted if what we are seeing that is being described as UAPs are in fact related to something extraterrestrial. And you tell me if you share this, but I am extremely skeptical of the direct observations of these very rapidly moving apparent aircraft craft within the atmosphere, in large measure because they do not create the sonic booms, for example, that one would expect when something moves faster than the speed of sound within an atmosphere as a result of its impact on just the displacement of air. And what wouldn't do that is a projection, let's just say from above, maybe. If you had something projecting onto particles in the atmosphere, water particles, let's say.
There's also laser-induced plasma effect, proton beam that they can use, anything that can excite. They cross the beams, and the point the beams cross, so there's enough energy there where it actually can create like a plasma in the air.
And the plasma would allow you to project something? Is that the idea? So
you can project. You can also dot matrix project like 3D images by patterning where the dots cross in the air. And
okay, so to connect the dots for viewers and listeners, the idea is it is very technologically difficult to imagine craft that can move through the atmosphere at incredible speeds, even more difficult to imagine craft that can do that without creating sonic booms. What makes this much more tractable from both the perspective of the speed at which things travel and their failure to create the usual sonic consequences of a craft moving through the air would be something like laser pointer, right? If you put a laser pointer and you put the dot on the ground for your cat, there's no meaningful limit to how quickly you can move it across the floor, because a tiny movement of your fingers moves the thing feet. And so were somebody interested in projecting something that appeared to be an object onto something like plasma or water particles in the atmosphere or whatever it was, they could then move it incredibly rapidly. And the prediction of that hypothesis would be that it would not have sonic consequences, right?
No, it would
So
not. Yeah, you would not have a sonic boom with that. And for the audience, if they want to look more into this, the technical term the military uses is ECCM, or electronic countermeasure, and the term that you can look up to find the video on it is Pentagon talking plasma grenade, or Pentagon talking plasma balls. Should find a video on it. You can find some of those declassified videos on it, and some of these declassified videos that other people are finding through FOIA are going back to some of these companies from 20 years ago, or longer, that they may have had this. So you got to think in the 1960s, when they were developing lasers at Q Division, which was a lot of the stuff that they did at Q Division still classified. What would be the first thing you would do as a scientist after you built two lasers? Cross the beams.
Yeah, sure.